Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I am Beth Syverson, an adoptive mom of a 19-year-old son, Joey, who is in recovery from addiction and who is struggling to find his path. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. We are committed to helping anyone touched by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. Today's guest is Brooke Randolph, an adoptive mom who is also a therapist, author, speaker, and trainer. She works with all members of the adoption constellation and employs a unique healing modality called Brainspotting. She is passionate about promoting excellence in therapy, openness in adoption, and family preservation. Welcome to Unraveling Adoption, Brooke. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about your brain spotting practice. First, though, why don't you just tell us any parts of your family's adoption story you want to share?
Early in my career, I was working at an international adoption agency as the vice president of social services, and part of my job required me traveling in lots of places and unfortunately visiting children in many places. And in that place, I really felt that there was a responsibility to care for older children who might not have as much opportunity for adoption and children who didn't have family care available to them. And so that led me towards adoption and adopted my son from Samoa in 2013. And it's been a wonderful journey of open intercountry adoption, having openness in a variety of ways. And we have also, since that time, I've also become the legal guardian of one of his biological siblings. So we have a fun dynamic, and they call me different things, and I like raising two teenage boys.
Wow. Your story is so unique because I've never heard of anyone adopting from Samoa. I'm sure there are others, but it's not as common as many other countries. And that you have an open intercountry adoption, that sort of boggles my mind. And I'm also curious, you started working for an adoption agency before you were an adoptive parent? Were you just a social worker and that was just one of the places you found work, or were you super interested in adoption at that time? Or
I was very interested. I went into graduate school with the intention of specializing in adoption, writing all my papers that direction, and attending some trainings. So that was always kind of where I was headed.
Was there adoption somewhere else in your family, or?
At that time, there was not. In undergrad, I did have a friend who chose adoption for her child. And so that did provide me some more exposure to like her expectant care counselor and things that she went through. So I actually started in graduate school focusing on birth parent grief and just have ended up working with adult adoptees more than other members of the constellation.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, great. Well, tell me, how did you manage to have an open intercountry adoption? Because I think almost always aren't intercountry adoptions by their nature super closed?
No,
not always.
If you have the intention and the desire, you just have to ask questions and get some information. There are additional efforts. It may not always be as easy, that some of the making contact, building relationships require travel. But at this point, we can get text messages and phone calls pretty regularly.
Yeah, I guess things are different with the tech, but yeah, you can't just have a park play day, whenever you want. You have to kind of arrange for travel. And plus probably some language issues.
Not in Samoa. Almost everyone in Samoa is bilingual and speaks English.
Oh, okay. That's good. Do you know of any other countries that are more amenable to having open adoptions?
I think that there are many countries where that is possible. The issue comes in how much effort the adoptive parents put into it, and also how much the agency is resisting it. So some agencies may be more resistant, but it is certainly not impossible.
Okay. And for those that might be new to the adoption space, what are the benefits of having an open adoption? What are your sons getting that they wouldn't be getting if it was a closed adoption?
Oh, well, I actually helped publish a book on this topic several years ago on understanding adoptee search, reunion, and open adoption. So I'm a big proponent of open adoption that provides them some information that they need to help form their identity and have more solid identity development. It answers questions, and it also builds our relationship. If I am open in general, then they know that they can trust me more.
Yeah.
But it could be things from recipes to stories, like family stories. And in this case, and I think probably in many cases, their biological mom, she'll tell them to listen to me. She supports all of that. She calls me mom or your mom to them. So I think it just gives them a good, firm foundation in knowing who they are and where they stand with everybody.
Nice. Well, did you go into it intentionally creating an open adoption, or did it develop over time?
My intention was always openness. You have to maybe try a couple pathways on how are we going to do this that works for everyone. The initial writing letters wasn't going to work. So we had to figure out what other ways were possible to maintain contact.
Why didn't the writing letters work?
I don't know. It didn't fit for somebody for some reason.
Oh, it just didn't happen. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
They weren't responded to. So that says, okay, this isn't working. So what else are we going to do?
Okay. I'm sure you know Lori Holden's work in open adoption. And she's told me that even though my son's adoption, my 19-year-old son, we adopted from Japan in an extremely closed adoption. But she says I could have an open adoption in the aspect of with my son, not necessarily with his birth family.
Right. So it's openness and contact and openness and information.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's brilliant. It doesn't always have to mean you're best friends with the birth family and that you celebrate every holiday together. There's many different ways it could look, right?
There are many ways it can look. I think openness and information is essential. And then I think openness and contact whenever possible is beneficial.
Yep. I just ran into somebody yesterday that had a friend who had a 14-year-old that didn't know they were adopted. That broke my heart. I've literally had trouble sleeping over it. It's just oh no. I thought we knew that nowadays, but I guess some people still don't know that big giant secrets and blank spaces in one's information is not cool, right?
Right.
Really damaging.
And it's always going to come out
somehow.
And the more you hold information, the more you are setting yourself up for damaged relationships in the future.
Yeah, it'll just get worse and worse and worse. So that's kind of an extreme example, but you could think of other aspects of your adopted child's life that may be uncomfortable, or maybe your birth mother's conception story is not ideal and you would want to shelter that from your child, but that's not fair, right? They age appropriately need to know their whole story.
Absolutely. And they generally can handle it way better than adults can. And they feel relief from knowing the actual story.
Yeah. And the longer you wait, the more it becomes giant in the secret keeper's head. And it just, So pretend you were talking to this 14-year-old's parents, not the 14-year-old yet, but the parents in therapy. What would you tell them as far as open adoption goes?
I've had the experience where people call me and they want me to see their child and they haven't told them. And I'm like, I could not ethically be that child's therapist, because then I would have information that they didn't. If they asked me, because they probably suspect, because most of them have figured it out at some point. Yeah. If they asked me, that would be a complete ethical bind on because I should never be the one to tell a child.
No.
So it's really at that point, if parents are willing, working with them on how are you going to share this information, and perhaps supporting them by being there when they do. But mostly, I don't know that I've ever actually had to do that I can talk them through. Here are some things to think about. Go have the conversation, and then
let me know how it goes.
If you need help picking up the pieces, which they usually don't, because it usually is fine.
I bet the child kind of suspects something, but doesn't know what it is. So when they finally figure out what it is, that might be even a relief for the child.
Exactly.
And the parents might be relieved too, not having to hold on to the secret all the time. Well, what is the title of your open adoption book?
It's called It's Not About You, Understanding Adoptee Search, Reunion, and Open Adoption.
I love that title because, God, adoptive parents, it's not about you. Good Lord. It's not about
Well, and
you.
it can be both like, I mean, you say it in almost the like, I want to shake them, like it's not about you, but it can also be understood in like very comforting, like it's not about you. It's not that you're a bad
Oh,
parent. It's that
yeah,
this is
yeah.
just an innate desire for
Yeah.
information.
Right. Yeah, I can see it both ways, and that we just need to get out of the way. I think that adoptive parents a lot of times just think that, I don't know, the world revolves around us or something, and the culture probably contributes to that. We certainly are the pivot point in this whole adoption industry, right? Without the adoptive parents, we would have nothing. So
I say that we are the privileged part of the adoption
yes,
constellation.
we are the ones by far with the most choice in the matter. The adoptees obviously have zero, and the birth parents often have zero or very little choice or power in the situation. So, yeah, so adoptive parents, get out of the way.
And get out of your own way, right? Like you're
Yeah.
probably making the situation worse for yourself both now and in the future by letting your
Yeah.
stuff, which is something we as humans, we
Everybody
all
has
do. We all have
stuff.
stuff and we
Mm-hmm.
let our stuff get in the way. But if we
Mm-hmm.
can get out of our own way, it will benefit everyone.
Yeah. And the way will become easier, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you open things up, get support, don't feel like you can do it all yourself. Oh, I've got this handled. I'm super parent. I'm over here. I can do everything. So, find people like Brooke that can help you through and help you understand your own issues. I know with my son, for a year after his crisis of mental health issues and stuff, that I thought I had to be super mom and fix him. That did not work. And then I realized, oh, I have a ton of attachment issues myself, and his situation is pulling up all sorts of stuff. So I've gone in and dug my own stuff out, which has helped tremendously. It's helped me, grow as a person. I'm still working through it, working through my infertility grief, just all this stuff is layered over the top of me. But me working on those things have helped my son tremendously by getting out of his way, basically by taking my stuff over here, working on it on my own. And it released some of the pressure off of him, I think. When you see adoptive parents, is that kind of your tack? You help them deal with your own shit and not try to fix their kids? Is that?
Yes. And also, just recognizing that our kids need something different, that they are regulating with us.
Mm-hmm.
It may look different, but my teenagers are still using me for regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that to varying degrees that they're doing it or not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, I, as a therapist, don't believe that any of us ever actually self-regulate.
Oh, we all co-regulate.
This is going to shake some parents up because they want their kids to self-regulate. But I don't think any of us actually self-regulate. When I am regulating on my own, it is because I have internalized co-regulation. My attachment figures, my mom who's wonderful, my dad, my best friends, my cousins who are supportive, all of those people are internalized. So I can be in a moment without them and know what they would say, know how they might encourage me to find regulation, or even just think about, oh, I can't wait to hear what Casey has to say about this, right? Like all of that is all internalized co-regulation. So I think we are all co-regulating all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's just we are able to do it from more of a distance or with more time in between. And so, but that's something we all build. And so our kids are never going to self-regulate. Our kids may internalize the things we have taught them, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah. And we have to do it too. I hear you saying.
Right. They can't. It's not going to be helpful for them to internalize us as their co-regulator if we're not very regulated ourselves.
Yeah. If we're in freak out mode, that whole first year with Joey, I was in freak out mode the whole time, which guess what that did to my son? Elevated his freak out mode. It's just, it just makes everything worse. So God, it's so hard to, especially when the stakes are so high, our kids get into substances or suicidality or self-harm or so many things that are like literally life and death. And our freak out mode is justifiably very high. So that comes to serious hard work for the adoptive parents or any parents of struggling kids, right?
Right. Because it's justifiable, it's understandable, and it's not helpful.
Right.
So if a kid is suicidal to any degree, whether it's passive suicidality or like we have a plan, us freaking out is not going to help. It's not going to calm them down, but it's also not going to enable us to keep them safe. It's only going to complicate the situation. So we have to be able to find our own regulation.
Yeah. Literally, you might have 2 deaths on your hands instead of 1 if you both get wound up, it gets so, there's been times where I've felt like, well, geez, this seems like a good idea to me now too, to be suicidal. It's like you can get really wound around. And if you're not, if one of you isn't grounded, you both can spiral down and then you lose you both. That I don't know how often that happens, but it felt like there were times where I was losing my own mind in this whole process. And that is no good. That is not okay. And there have been times I had to say to myself, Beth, I don't know if we're going to lose Joey, but we can't lose you too. It's been some really, really tough times, but that's so important. So how often do you deal with adoptive parents versus the kids? What is your practice mostly?
Well, at the moment, I might have 1 teenager on my caseload. I'm not seeing kids. I'm in the midst of parenting adopted teens. That means that I may not always be the most therapeutic person for them to meet with, because I might have some transference or just the like being a parent, right? Like the kids are complaining about their parents tracking their phone, and
that might pull some stuff up for you because you're tracking your kid's phone,
right? Like deal with it, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
To be therapeutic, you have to be able to have unconditional positive regard. Despite what some parents would like from therapists, it is not therapeutic for us to try to talk to them about a thing or be a disciplinarian. That's not actually helpful.
Do parents come and say, can you tell my kid to do XYZ? Do they come in to you all the time?
Of course
to do that?
They do.
Oh, man. I guess I was a piano teacher for years, and they would always tell me, can you tell my kid to practice more? I'm like, well, I don't really want to, because I don't know, even if I told them, or even if the parents told them, they still have to do it themselves. The kid still has to want to practice themselves. We can't force them to practice, either of us. So it's probably similar. The kid is going through their own work, and the parents have their own work, and no one can tell the kid how to heal, right? Am I on the right track with that? Everyone's on their own path to figure out how to heal themselves.
Right.
But yeah, I bet parents try to get in there with you. What do you tell parents at that point? They say, can you tell my kid to XYZ?
That wouldn't be a thing that they came in on the day. As they present for therapy, because I run a group practice, so I'm still helping them, connecting them to other therapists who work with me.
Oh, I see.
But I'm starting out in the conversation. What is it that your child wants to work on? Why did they want to come to counseling? And helping introduce that idea that the child has goals. And then we're working towards the education that's our focus. We can't, parents' goals we're not going to get anywhere on those. We have to focus on the kids' goals, and the other stuff works itself out, but in the time that it needs to. We really have to focus first on regulation and felt safety and helping the child have some level of attachment so that they can feel safe enough to look at trauma and process trauma. And it's only in that place where we start to see behavioral change. We can't go in with the goal of behavior.
Fix this behavior.
Because that's not therapeutic.
No.
And those behaviors are symptoms. They're there for a reason, that are helping the child survive.
Yeah.
Nothing is going to work unless we follow this important foundational piece.
Yes. I agree with you. The behaviors are just a symptom of something else. So the stealing is not the issue. The substance use is not the issue. It's what's causing them to want to do those behaviors, right?
Right. And stealing's a survival mechanism. It's not a thing you can teach out of people. They have to have felt safety.
Can you explain felt safety for people who have never heard that word before?
Yeah. So felt safety is feeling that you are safe. It doesn't matter how safe a child is in my home. It doesn't matter that I have alarms and we're nurturing and we have all of the food available, and the child is still going to feel unsafe because of their nervous system because of their past experiences, because they don't know who I am. And so it doesn't matter how safe it actually is. It's about how much does the child feel that they are safe.
And the child's the only one that can determine how much felt safety they have.
Yes.
You can't observe them and go, oh, you must have a lot of felt safety because I've done all these things for you.
No.
You don't get to decide how safe they feel.
Right.
That's very important. And I know that you specialize in doing brain spotting, which I want to talk to you about. Do you use brain spotting only for adults, or do you use that with kids too, or is it really only for adults?
No, absolutely with kids.
With kids, even better with kids?
I mean, it's a modality that we can use for a lot of different things and with a lot of different people. Yeah.
And how did you find out about brain spotting, and what point of your career were you at when you discovered brain spotting?
It was like 2015, maybe. I'm not really sure how long ago it was, but one of my adoptee clients said, I heard about this thing. And so I researched it and said, oh, this is the thing, and started referring my clients to go do this also with someone who is local. But it wasn't actually an adoptee who finally put their foot down and said, I'm not going to go see anyone else. You need to get trained now.
Oh,
and
very good.
So I did. And so I got trained and then kept getting trained, and then was invited to become a brain spotting consultant, and then invited to do some specialty trainings. And so now I am a global brain spotting trainer.
And why don't you give us an overview of what brain spotting is?
So brain spotting is a brain-body mindfulness-based relational therapy, which means that our foundation is in relationship and relational attunement, and that we are utilizing the brain-body connection and using kind of a physiological approach to have psychological consequences. So as we are helping increase the specificity in a session, that we are finding ways that help clients have more access to whatever it is that they want to process, and then letting the mind, letting the brain do what it needs to do to heal itself. Because we all have that self-healing capacity, and the brain can heal itself if we give it the time and space in a safe enough environment. I don't like using the word safe a lot because a lot of my very traumatized clients never feel safe. But as we're talking here, the idea of safety or felt safety, I hope, is fairly common.
Oh, very good. So what does it look like on practical terms? You get to know the person, I suppose.
We do. We get to know the person. As the therapist, I have to be very attuned. I'm paying a lot of attention to what is going on with the individual, both in their brain and their body and in relationship together. How are they responding to me? What kind of space do they need? All of those pieces. So that's super important. The parts of brain spotting that make it so very helpful for working with the adoption constellation is that it is relationally based, that we are providing attunement that may have been missed earlier, there may not have gotten enough of, and that it's a very flexible approach. And so we are following the client's lead and allowing them some autonomy in understanding what they need, what will be the best way for them to heal. So it's very individualized. Sessions don't always look the same, but I did once write a blog on what does it look like, and I can send you the link if you want to add that.
Sure, we'll put that in the show notes.
That kind of breaks down some of the pieces for people, and then also knowing that it will be different.
Okay. Now, isn't there something to do with your eyes in brain spotting?
Yes, we use a fixed eye position that helps us gain more access to whatever it is we are trying to process. So we know that where you look affects how you feel. Anyone who's listening who's not driving, don't do this if you are driving. But, you know, if you can think about something recently that got you a little upset, maybe not big upset, because who knows where we'll go with that, but got you kind of, you know, like a 5 out of a scale of 10, something recently that you can recall, and think about how that changed in your body? Did you feel that upset in your stomach or in your head? Did your body get hot? And then just holding your head still, just notice if you can feel more of that body activation if you move your eyes over to the right or in the center or to the left. And not everyone has that internal experience that they can have that felt sense, but a lot of people are able to notice that where they look does affect how they feel, that they can access that feeling in their body more looking in one position or another.
So then when they feel safe enough to do so, they will leave their gaze in that activated space to kind of find deeper levels of that pain or issue?
Yes, that's not wrong. It can be more complicated than that. So it's not always an eye position that increases activation. For some of our clients who are already highly activated, we may find an eye position related to the place in the body that feels the least activated.
Oh, go the opposite way.
So that we can, as I'm thinking about, and using a really minor example, but as I'm thinking about that fight I got into with my friend and I just feel it all over and I'm so upset, but maybe in my hand, I don't feel so much upset. And so I am more able to process that argument while I'm focusing on that feeling in my hand that isn't quite as activated.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. So you have to be very intuitive and really tuned in as a therapist to do this work.
Right.
Like this is not just go by the book kind of checklist questions. It's very engaging, I'm sure.
No, but that's part of why I think it's so beneficial for members of the adoption constellation, particularly adoptees and birth parents who you've already mentioned really had no say or very little say over things. So feeling that we are following what is best for them is healing in itself. And I think there's also a lot of adoptive parents who maybe felt like at the mercy of a process.
Yeah.
And so a therapeutic modality that is very protocol based, like you have to do these steps and you have to follow what the therapist says, that's actually can kind of reinforce that and keep you in that space of a negative experience. We're having a therapeutic process that is more flexible and based on you as an individual can be more healing just in the process itself.
To be really seen, because that's a lot of adoptees and birth parents just don't ever feel seen.
Right.
Their identity is sort of obscured. And so this modality really helps people to be seen and individuated, and you don't feel like you're running through the mill. Like sometimes it's just such a grind. It's like, do this worksheet, do this, read this book. It can be, we've had so many different types of people trying to help us. And some of it is just, it just adds stress to you instead of taking things away. It's like a lot of shoulds or a lot of checklists, or even like the 12 steps in the addiction world, which 12 steps help a lot of people. But what if you're not able to even get past step one? Then what do you do? So I like these modalities that are more open and individual. I think that's really good. Is it only therapists that can do it, or can you get trained in brain spotting without having a therapy degree?
Some people will train other people who are not therapists in doing this. It can have huge benefits for sports performance and other kinds of things. However, just to think about that the brain is going to go where the brain needs to go. And if there are traumas, those can come up. And so making sure that anyone who isn't fully trained to work with that knows, what are you going to do? And who are you going to refer to? And how do you help someone who maybe didn't even realize that they had trauma and then it comes up? There's always a part of us that remembers, but things happen at young ages that we don't store in narrative memory as easily.
Yeah. So you'll be going along and then bam, somebody uncovers this major thing, and then you're on Zoom and you got to know what to do, right? So that's why it's better to have therapists do this, I suppose, that really are experienced and understand what you're getting yourselves into.
Right. I've talked at different conferences introducing brain spotting to parents and talked about ways that you can utilize these principles as a therapeutic parent in being flexible, in being attuned to eye position, in just allowing the child to process on their own speed. So there's parts of it to use, but
Sure.
even as a therapist that specializes in adoption, I cannot be my child's therapist. That's too complicated because it might be about me. And so I wouldn't be any help if they're processing things about me, or even if it's their other mom, I'm still in that role. And so that's not beneficial. So they need to have somebody else to work with them on those things.
And just help me understand the eye position thing. Depending on where you're looking, does it engage a different part of your brain? Is that why the eye position matters in brain spotting? Or does anyone know what is involved?
So there are theories or hypotheses about exactly what's going on and where we're doing it, but it's not about one position equals a different part of the brain.
Okay.
In fact, one of the theories is more about the positioning of the extraocular muscles is just helping access. It's almost like you put in the right combination, and then the right file comes out for you to work through.
Okay.
That's a metaphor, obviously.
It's different for every person, or if you look in your upper left, is that where certain things are? Or does everybody have a different map?
It's different for every person. We could process the same presenting issue 3 different days and have 3 different eye positions.
Oh, even the same person could. Okay. Yep. So it's not some code you have to decode. It's just an organic thing that you just have to discover.
No, I mean, there are between 1 and 4 quadrillion synaptic connections. The brain is pretty complicated. So It's probably actually that these things are in lots of different places. And so we're just accessing different parts at different times and what's most needed.
Wow. Do you think it would be okay if I shared my little story about my brain spotting experience?
Yeah.
I hope that it jives with what you do. I don't know. I've done it only a couple of times, but it was very good for me. When Joey was really struggling, after I quit trying to fix him, I was like, okay, well, let me go fix me. And I also wanted to find modalities that would help him. So I went and tried a bunch of things myself to make sure that it wasn't, I don't know, dangerous or too woo-woo. I wanted to make sure they were safe. So I tried brain spotting, and I did it a couple of times, and it was amazing because certain places I looked just like, it's like, there it is. It just opened up like a door opening. And I found in brain spotting, I found Ruby, who's little me. I think I was 4 or 5 in a red dress, which I never would have wore. Ruby is much more daring and extroverted than I was. I was extremely shy and just closed off when I was a kid. So this Ruby was me, but the me that was not able to be who I was. And so that's how I was introduced to a big part of me that's been trying to come out for a long time. So I was very grateful for this brain spotting. And I've combined that with my IFS work, or internal family systems parts work. And Ruby kind of comes along with me there too. And I figure it's all good, right? I've done breath work, all these different modalities, EMDR. I think the same thing about all of those is that they're all using our own brain's power to find our own healing. Are you familiar with all those other things I just threw at you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So relying on our own brain with a qualified therapist to help guide us so we don't get into trouble or get too scared or too off track, I guess, or too, I don't know what could happen, but you want to do this with somebody that knows what they're doing. But you're not following someone else's directions. You're exploring your own brain's solutions. And I found through those different modalities that my brain really, it knows what I need more than anybody else would know. So that's what I love about brain spotting and these other things, that it just helps you uncover what your own brain has been trying to tell you all this time and hasn't had a chance. So does my experience in brain spotting, is that similar to other people's, or am I just weird?
I think every experience is a little different. I mean, you're talking about kind of an experiential finding a part integrated to IFS, which brain spotting is very integrative. We utilize it with a lot of other modalities. I have clients who have a very emotional experience, whether they connect that to any images or thoughts at all.
Okay.
I've also had people have a purely physical experience where they just notice the activation moving through their body, have various physical sensations, and then it changes. And then something else is shifted in them. So it can be a variety of experiences. It can be more memory-based, more thought-based, more emotional, or more physical, or a combination, obviously.
And you would hope that whatever the client needs, they would find it somehow, because even the client probably doesn't know exactly what they need at that point, but that you'd open up through this therapeutic process and they would get it filled somehow through the openness of this therapy, that they would find what they need there. Well, I think that's amazing. And I love that there are people like you working in the adoption space that are able to offer things that are different than the run-of-the-mill stuff that our healthcare system wants to throw at us. We're with Kaiser Permanente. I don't know if anyone knows what that is. It's our HMO. It felt so old-fashioned and outdated, and that's why I had to go outside and find these other healing modalities. I wish they would incorporate it in, but I think they're scared of it or something, or they just like doing things the way they've always done it. Maybe it's just really hard to move those big organizations. Do you feel like you're on the edge of things, or is Brainspotting becoming more mainstream from your point of view?
Well, I would say it's more mainstream among therapists, especially during the pandemic. A lot of people were getting trained, but different training experiences. Some people do one training, and then some people are doing trainings every month.
Oh, wow.
So I think there's a lot of different therapists out there who are aware of it, and people are using it in all kinds of places, but in those big organizations like that, they may not be able to tell you that they're trained in it, unfortunately, because the organization is telling them not to.
Yes, I think that is probably the case. It's very frustrating. Do you feel like Brainspotting has a particularly unique aspect that helps people in the adoption constellation?
Yeah, the relational foundation, what we call the uncertainty principle, we are making no assumptions. We know that adoption is very complicated, that every story is very complicated. We can't assume things about people, and it interferes with the relationship when we do. But that also leads us to have that flexibility in how we set up things with a client. How the process goes is very based on the individual. And I think that client-centered focus is also very healing.
Yeah, I bet.
And the part that it's so brain body is helpful for people who may not have words for their experience, whether because it was so very early, or because for some of our intercountry adoptees, the memories are encoded in a different language and that they may or may not have access to currently.
Oh, I never thought of that.
So I tell clients, like, you can talk as much or as little as you want to, but we can have people go an entire hour without speaking a word and still have major impacts as a result.
Wow. That sounds amazing, because the cognitive behavioral therapy that works through your frontal lobes, that doesn't get to the trauma.
No.
I figured that out from the Body Keeps a Score, and through many, many therapy sessions for my son and myself, that just talking about it, well, you should be able to talk about it just as a general person, but the therapeutic talking is not going to help a child who was adopted at 7 months and relinquished at birth, and they'd had no words.
Yeah.
They had no words. And I never thought about kids that are adopted like at 3 or 4 who had language, but then lost it in an intercountry adoption. Their whole early experience is encoded. I never thought of it that way. That's pretty intense. So this Brainspotting doesn't require words. I think that's great. I love those modalities that just get right into the body and the body-mind, as you say. This is a body-mind kind of situation, right? If you were in the adoption constellation, or heck, just a regular person, just an ally and just listening to this podcast that has nothing to do with adoption, how would you find somebody that does Brainspotting?
Well, I would say Google it first and see who comes up in your area.
Okay.
Often when you Google therapy, Psychology Today is going to come up at the top. So here's my caveat. I have some concerns about Psychology Today in general, but one that will be pertinent to your listeners is that the modalities that people go and check off, they can check off anything they want to.
Yeah.
And it may or may not mean that they're trained in that.
Okay.
And they're also probably checking off specialties that they don't actually specialize in.
They just want more clients.
Well, they're willing to work with these people, right? Because they want more clients.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean they have any specific specialization. So how do you find a therapist for your listeners who are an adoption therapist? And I think that's super important.
Yes. So adoptive constellation people, finding an adoption therapist is hard enough that now we're going to try to find an adoption therapist trained in Brainspotting. So go hire Brooke, I guess is what you do. Are you still working with clients or are you training mostly?
I do still work with clients, but I am only licensed in 4 states currently.
Which 4 are you in?
Indiana, Massachusetts, Kentucky, and Texas. And then my group has some people who are licensed in a couple of other states, but since they're pretty full, we don't advertise those other states. We just, when they happen to email, then we see if there is room.
If they're available.
And then I just try to keep list of people that I've trained and other people I know across the world who are doing a good job.
Okay. Is it important in Brainspotting to be in person or does Zoom work just as well?
Zoom works depending on the person. There's a lot of things to consider. There may be a lot of benefit from being in your own space that feels more safe, but for me, I don't get a whole lot of benefit of doing Zoom Brainspotting in my space if I'm sitting in the same chair that I work in.
Oh.
Now that's because I do a lot of telehealth therapy. And so I'm working in the exact same setup. So I move myself to my bedroom if I'm doing my own therapy or go sit in my car and some parking lot and do my own therapy. For some of my clients, it's really beneficial to be online because then they don't have to drive after they've just had a big experience if people are prone to dissociation. So that creates more safety for them. You've got to figure it out. And then having a therapist who understands how to translate. We do it slightly differently using the client's space rather than just the screen because you can't get the full visual field from a screen, especially if a client is using their phone.
Oh, right. It's so tiny.
Right.
And you want their eyes to be able to, you keep your head still, but you want your eyes to be able to go as far as they can go, right?
Yeah. And so that's pretty far. It's bigger than any screen unless you're sitting like right up on the screen.
Yeah. Well, those are really good points. I never thought about that driving home. So if you're already home, maybe with your spouse or a supportive person for you to kind of catch you when you're done, because it can be pretty emotional, right? You're pulling stuff up. And although some people, it might be better to go far away from home for those same reasons.
Right. Because sometimes home isn't a safe space.
Not safe. Yeah. So, interesting. Well, I know that there probably need to be way more adoption therapists and probably need to be way more brain spotting therapists, but I'm sure that people can dig around and find, and I have an adoptive parents group called Aptitude, and we have a database full of lists and directories and books and articles and things that I'll put your name in there for sure. If you have any other resources for me to put in there for brain spotting, I'll put any links that you have for me in that list. So people listening way down the road or people joining Aptitude later can find that. I think sharing those resources is so important. So there's not that many compared to what the need is. There's so much need out there, right?
Yeah. And there's constantly changing. A group that existed may not exist any longer. So I try to keep an updated list every month.
Oh, good idea.
And just pay attention to what's out there.
And if they wanted to get a hold of you to hire you or to ask you for a referral or something, how would they get a hold of you?
My website is brooke-randolph.com or my group practice where everyone is trained in basic adoption competency and most of them are doing a lot of work with the adoption constellation. That's counseling at the greenhouse. And while we have different URLs for different states, Greenhouse Indy, INDY.com has access to all of those.
Oh, that's great to know. All right. I'll put that in the show notes and all the other things that we talked about too. So look in the show notes, everybody, if you missed any of that. And gosh, I really appreciate you coming on to talk about this, Brooke. It's nice to talk to another adoptive parent that really gets it about how we need to do the best we can with our kids and helping them deal with their own adoption trauma and our own trauma, whatever it is. It's all interrelated. And I know I have learned so much from my son. He has been my best teacher. I never thought I would be so appreciative of all the things I've learned because at first it was so torturous. And I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to survive this. But we're 4 years in and we're surviving. And both of us have learned and grown so much thanks to a lot of therapists like yourself and different people that have helped us along the way. So thank you for being there for everyone in the adoption constellation.
Yeah, and thank you for the work you're doing to support parents and providing resources for them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, if any of you are an adoptive parent and are interested, my group is called Aptitude, a support group for adoptive parents facing adoptions challenges. And so it's got that database I told you about, a private Facebook group, a monthly speaker series, and a book club. So if any adoptive parents want to come learn and grow together, it's mostly a lot of resources sharing and just moral support as we all are on this difficult journey together. And if you'd like to support Unraveling Adoption and all the work we're doing here, including this commercial-free podcast, you're invited to become a Patreon supporter for as little as $5 a month. Just go to patreon.com/unravelingadoption. And a big welcome and thank you to Margaret Priver, who is our latest Patreon supporter. Thank you, Margaret, and welcome to the Patreon team. Find Unraveling Adoption on social media, on YouTube. Share our podcast and this episode with anyone you know that might be interested in learning more about Brainspotting or who might have a Samoan adoptive kid. Now I know one person that's adopted from Samoa, so you never know. So please share and everyone be well. And Brooke and I want you all to stay safe.